That is control, pretty powerful. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the governance meeting of the JPS Board of Managers. It's Thursday, January 9th. I hope that everyone's New Year's resolutions are still intact, and hopefully that you all can make those resolutions stay intact until maybe our February meeting. It is 10:10, and I will call this meeting to order. Thank you for coming to this special meeting. It's a little bit off our normal schedule. We did not have much business that was pertinent in December, so we decided to wait, but I didn't want to wait on this topic dealing with orientation and board education and pile that on top of our regularly scheduled February meeting. So my hope today is to kind of discuss this topic, kind of open the book, get some ideas. If we need to further refine, we can do that at our regular scheduled meeting in February. And my hope would be that we have these, the necessary changes to the board training and written into part of our board standard operating procedures by our April governance meeting, and then forwarded to the board for approval in April. Some topics that I want to be able to discuss, and honestly, I don't know that this has to be a 2-hour conversation. I know we're slated for 2 hours today. I know that there's a full committee agenda for the day in this room, so we don't have to spend all of the time. But I want to discuss new member orientation and board member continuing education, work on or at least discuss the board's travel policy, and then begin work on revisions to the board's standard operating procedure, which haven't been adjusted since September of 2016. I'm sorry, 2006. So we have a little bit of work to do, and instead of doing all of that work in this committee, I'll ask for, towards the end of the meeting, I'll ask for some leeway from the committee if we can kind of break this up into some subsections so that we're not just completely overwhelmed. That's kind of where we are. With that, I'll see if there's any citizens wishing to address the committee. There are none. I will ask for an approval for the October 24th meeting.
The October 24th meeting.
Motion by Ms. DeBose, a second by Chairman Powell. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. I've kind of gone through my chair report, other than which I hope everyone had a very happy holiday season. And I hope that as members of the board, as well as members of the executive staff that are here today, know that we are starting 2020 with a very exciting year for this hospital district. And as we begin to maybe not see dust flying in the air, but all the inner workings of actually implementing the bond program. So it's going to be a crucial year for all of us. So look forward to that. With that, I have asked Ron to put together a few slides to maybe start off our conversation with board training, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Ron.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sure this is on. Okay. As Roger was saying, really my goal here is just to have some but provide some boundaries as it relates to training for your discussion. And I just prepared a few slides, and I try to stick with the topics related to the board bylaws and the policy that is in front of you, the LD 1000 policy, which already spells out continuing education and board education. And so the guiding principle for these slides, and I know just to kind of reset a little bit, so at the October meeting, as many of you that were there, we discussed the Code of Ethics, and we were going through and discussing the Code of Ethics, and one of the sections in the Code of Ethics was that does this apply to the board? And that it does, and I believe that Charlie was mentioning this, that well, if this applies to the board, well, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate education and training associated with that.
You're kind, Ron. I think I said let the next chairman in the no, but you're right. That came up during that process, and I appreciate Roger and this committee addressing it right after the year. I met with Chuck, we talked about this, so we need to get this on. And when Amanda and Jim came on, we kind of realized our own boarding wasn't, so again, we're post-bond now. It's time that a lot of things that moving forward, so good. Thank you for your.
No, absolutely. So what I tried to do to just to kind of put a little structure around this discussion, as Mr. Chair had mentioned, is I used as the guiding principle for these 3 or 4 slides the board bylaws section paragraph 2.56, which talks about Board of Managers self-education, self-evaluation and education. And in that paragraph, it talks on these 4 areas that are required or stipulated in the bylaws. The first is an annual self-evaluation, and this is a very common thing for most boards. This is dealing with evaluating the effectiveness of the board, and it can be done in various ways, and so there's no prescribed way of doing it. The bylaws doesn't prescribe a way of doing it, but I've seen it in prior life as either some kind of written evaluation or assessment or some kind of discussion with the board chair or the chair committees. And so that would be the first point of discussion. And again, I'll lean on Neil and others that have been more involved in this process in the past to kind of educate us about how we've done these things in the past as well. But this is just more of a framework. The second topic is board orientation itself. And I know we already do that for new board members, and I know Amanda and Zim just recently went through that. So, and they have, and so I know they have feet. Right, and so as was discussed, this is an area that we certainly can maybe enhance, improve, and so and also is highlighted by the bylaws as well. The third area is more directly related to my area, which is annual compliance training. Now, for the workforce, for JPS workforce, we have a computer-based learning module for general compliance. That's typically around a 15-minute general compliance module, and then there's another compliance module around HIPAA and privacy that all of the workforce takes. I don't recall and I don't know whether you all, as board members, take those computer-based learning modules or not. Okay. Okay. So obviously I have some specific thoughts around this. What I've seen, again, there's no one way of doing this. I've seen this done where we in compliance could pick a board meeting once a year and have it be an agenda item on that board meeting and present the annual compliance training. You all can get credit for that. That way. Obviously, we can do it a hybrid with computer-based and live, but at least with live, we get to have some interaction and discussion. So that's a consideration in that one. That one is fairly easy. And then the last one is, as Mr. Chair had mentioned, is really not prescribed at all. It's really fully up to the board's discretion, which is the Board of Managers Continuing Education Program. And continuing education is really how do you as board members stay up to par on what's happening in healthcare in general, what's happening at JPS, what areas of education, governance or effectiveness do you feel like you need more training and education on? And that could be both internal and external in the form of conferences and seminars and so forth. So those are really the only area, the 4 areas, and I'm going to stop here and turn over back to Mr. Chair. Are these the 4 areas that you wanted to talk through, or how did you want to go about?
That's great. Ron, thank you. So, first off, Suzanne pulled together this morning a copy of Policy LD 1000, which is orientation and continuing education for the Board of Managers, senior management, leaders of the organized medical staff. My hope is as we as board discuss what we think that new member orientation should look like. I mean, how involved realistically, with our schedules. I mean, if you look at LD 1000, it's detailed down to the, to the 9th degree. is that detail necessary for each new board member as part of our orientation? That's what I want to discuss today. And then what I'd like to do is take those parts of LD 1000 and move those actually over into the board standard operating procedure and archive the Board of Managers and the policy LD 1000, so that the board's training is kind of separate from the medical staff and the hospital. So you have a copy of that. I don't have a copy of the current standard operating procedures for everybody today, and I apologize about that, but I'll make sure that if they're not easily accessible on the portable, that they're there, or Neil can send them out. But like I said, those haven't been revised since 2006. LD 1000, the standard operating procedures, all mention all of those four things that Ron's talked about here, but they're kind of all over the place. So I want to put them all in one spot, and I'm speaking specifically for the Board of Managers. So that's kind of what I'd like to do. So you all can see what's included, what should be included when we talk about new member orientation. And then it also talks about the ongoing continuing education. And honestly, this document's not far off of where probably we need to be. I mean, I think some of it's a little more in-depth than maybe it needs to be, but it's pretty much laid out there. We just need to move it into the standard operating procedures and then clean it up and then follow it, which is something that, you know, I think has been lacking, not by any fault of any board member or any member of the staff. It's just this organization's moving and it can't stop. So my question now would be to the committee and to the members present is, what do we think that new member orientation should look like? I know that Amanda and Zim are here and have been somewhat dismayed by the onboarding process, so maybe we start with them.
Sure. Come on, sure.
Now, I will warn you all, Amanda came in and said, I'm ready to get to work, so.
I did. Actually, it was a really good morning today. I got my coffee in. We're good to go. No, I think that this is very detailed in what we need to do. I don't think that the training itself needs to be done all in one day. I think we need to look at what that kind of rotation of training, of getting up to speed. We had talked previously about doing some kind of meet and greet with all of the department heads previously. I mean, we can talk about structure and how that works through, but I think this is a detailed list of some of the things that I would have enjoyed learning prior to.
You don't like learning on the fly?
You know, I do it very well, but I'm a researcher. Not everybody's a researcher. So I think we can start out with this. So I'm glad we're having this discussion now, that our feedback was heard, and that we can move forward. I know that one of the other things, just making sure that all, like finance is a big part of it, that discussion is placed into the leadership training as well.
Well, wait on
Jim?
Go ahead, Rev.
Well, one thing that I want to share is that you're answering Amanda and Zim, but when I came on, that was none for me.
Well, I just asked them first as they were the newest in the
Right.
room.
But I was thinking that matter of fact, my orientation, my first day, they were taking a vote on firing the CEO.
That's the past CEO. The past one. Not the current.
Reverend, we call that baptism by fire.
But my question, I have two questions. One is, what is the level of orientation? How many days is it for new employees? 2 days?
Yes, 2 days.
Because I would want to consider that some of the orientation that goes to new employees will be part of the board orientation. I think there are some things that we need to know in reference to the operation of JPS versus just board operation.
There's two suggestions I would make. Pia and Nikki before her have assembled an incredible team,
and we have probably changed orientation for our employees 100%. And they constantly reinvent it and make it new every year. I'm really impressed with our orientation. And orientation is not anything that anybody wakes up to and says, yay, I can't wait to get to orientation. But I will tell you that the surveys we get back from our employees say, we really liked the orientation, it was very helpful. The other thing that I think that's a great suggestion is that there be a portion of that you all either attend or go to. We have them every 2 weeks, and we have 45 to 65 people in each one of them. The other thing that I would encourage you all to do, which some of you have done and some of you haven't because it's busy schedules, is to literally take a tour of where we are and what we have, what our facilities are. The other thing is I've spoken to our new chair, and what the new chair would like, and Dr. Weber can well speak for himself, but is to bring, to Amanda's point, bring leaders in and say, this is my department. I have 400 employees. Here's our responsibilities. Here's what we do. And take 15 minutes or so of a board meeting to give you guys an idea of the faces who run those, give you the org chart, and give you an idea of what their responsibilities are, so you just don't see people floating in the audience and not know who they are. So I think tours, a portion of that, you all attending part of our orientation or us guiding it to them, because Pia and her team are excellent, and then the aspects of knowing who we as staff are.
I have one other.
Sure.
On the continuing education for board of managers, I was looking the other day on my email, and there was a conference in, it says the 10 continuing education program that are charged within the United States, and I happened to see one in Hawaii. So do you think I could work?
Well,
That's why we're talking.
that one might be a busy conference.
That's why we're talking about travel.
What island?
That's coming up next, right? The travel policies.
Well, and travel is certainly a consideration that we need to put into this whole mix. I guess my only concern is, and I love the fact that we could bring all the departments in and work over their org charts. You mentioned 15 minutes. I want to make sure whatever we do is based on reality. Not much happens here in this building in 15 minutes unless
I
you're in
understand.
the ER.
I understand. However, my expectations are to try to limit to that, because if I say they have 30, it'll be an hour.
Right.
And I want to be not saying anything about y'all's presentations. But I want to be precise.
Like, it's a
and-
2-slide thing.
Yeah, I don't want
It's an overview.
that detail. It's
Yeah.
an overview. And I really want you all to feel comfortable with your leadership team and know who they are and what they do. And I think that will help you all a lot.
Well, everybody here has very different schedules, and everybody here has very tight schedules. And so I don't want the orientation to be so onerous that it becomes dreaded and then it becomes unfollowed or it becomes unimportant.
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
that needs to be, I think, paramount in whatever we discuss. Dorothy?
I think when as coming on as a new board member, it would have been nice as the beginning of it to have the executive team maybe come in as a group and say who they are, what their departments are. That would be your introductory to that staff, and that doesn't have to be a long detail. But I think when you come on as a board, you know you're going to get an orientation. And I'm going to have to devote this much time when I first start to come in. That's what I'm going to meet. I think as a part of that, you could schedule a tour to be a part of that orientation. These are requirements for board members. Attend this, go on the tour. These are and it doesn't have to, it's going to take more than an hour, but I do think you could do something at a half-day that would cover an introductory to most of these things, especially the staff, and a brief tour.
Well, and I mentioned our time is critical, their time is critical, because I'm not sure how everybody works, because every time I'm up here, somebody's in another meeting about something. So that's a critical part of it as well.
Well, I go back to what Amanda said. We certainly heard that, and what we're doing, wherever the structure goes, is headed in the right direction. We need an onboarding process. When I joined this board almost 10 years ago, I had Karen Van Wagner to my right, Tanya Beasy to my left.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Zim, what are your thoughts?
I guess I can't pass this off to anybody else, so. Of course, Amanda and I have talked about this, and having been the head of a large organization where we had to do orientations, you've really got two kinds of orientations that you're talking about in an organization. One is for the employees, which has a lot of detail to it and a lot of specifics, and the other is for board members, and you don't need to get into that kind of depth with board members. I think Dorothy's right. If you had the executives and maybe go one level lower, directors, that's as far as we need to go in all of this. And it's more to say, put a face with a name and things like that. Tour-wise, after being here a while, I'm not sure what the tour would look like, because if you were to take me down to McDonald's right now and turn me loose, you could probably see me in 2 weeks. Because this place is, I told you, there's two places I could get lost in. The Pentagon was one, and this is the other. So I think if we're going to look at a tour, it ought to be a fairly specific places that we need to go about. We don't need to know what's going on down in the waiting room and that kind of stuff. In fact, I came through the waiting room today and it was packed.
Yeah, it's busy.
I don't know that we need to know what's going on in ER or any of that. Things we do need, though, that I haven't gotten yet, and I don't know whether Amanda's, is what are the policies for the board? Travel, for example. We fill out an ethics form and whatnot, and a declaration of conflict of interest. But what is the things that this board could be asked to go do, and how do we go do them so that we don't get in trouble, are the kind of things that we ought to be focusing on as we do an orientation for new board members. Other than that, that would be a special period for just a new board member. Now, I like the idea maybe every so often we spend 15 minutes and bring somebody new in front of everybody, particularly if they're brand new, and let them see them. And we've been doing a fairly good job of that, I think, but I don't know because I don't know who's new and who's not. But those are the things that I would like to see. But I particularly want to see the things that we as board members could be subjected to and what the policies and procedures are for that.
One of the things that we would think about regarding a tour is not just a tour to say, this is this. I think it helps board members to know patient flow and the challenges we have in the buildings that we have, getting folks from one side to the other and give you an idea of that expanse, because that's helpful. The other thing I think is helpful for you to understand is dealing with issues of where certain things are located and the challenges that presents, or the positives that it presents. I think it wouldn't be just, hey, look at our ED or look at that. It would really be about where the movement of JPS needs to be in the next 5 to 10 years as we look at the overall facilities and looking at that. And then probably give you a visual of where our locations are outside this main campus, because we are not a hospital, we're a network. And I think it might be helpful for many of you all to realize that there's probably locations in the county that you don't know are there. And it might be helpful if you knew where all of those were and you knew a little bit about the activities that go on in those particular places. Not in depth, but just to give you an idea. In Arlington, it's a little bit different than our Watauga facility because of space. And here's our personnel. We have 10 people here and we have 400 people here. Those kind of things I think would be helpful.
I think that's a good point. Even if you didn't physically go,
Right.
it wouldn't hurt during the orientation, because I don't know what one of these things is, as long as we talk about, we call a clinic by a certain name, or we call something, and you get lost in that. It'd be nice if we just had part of the orientation of what, some people may not have time to go out to the north side or over to
Right.
see the clinics, but it'd be nice to know that that's what's sitting over at Rosedale, and this is what we do at that clinic, just so when people ask you in the community, have you been to the, Arlington? No. I mean, we got facilities in, all the way up to Grand Prairie.
Right.
I have one comment for you.
Sure.
I think there should be a presentation about the organized medical staff, and how they function and what they do, and I think you ought to hear the same thing from McLean, your physician group. Just
The one plus that this committee has, and I know you know this, Dr. Weber, is Dr. Miles being part of this, is the
New pres.
new vice chair.
Vice chair,
So Dr. Hurd is our new chair of the medical staff, and Dr. Miles is the new vice chair. And I think that is awesome in a couple of ways. First of all, that's new leadership and new ideas. But secondly, as a pathologist and some of the things that she deals with the lab and other things, I think her input's going to be hugely helpful. It's been hugely helpful for us, but I think in your role in that regard, you can help educate board and all of us. And being on this committee is hugely helpful too.
And I would follow up on Dr. Weber's suggestion. I wrote a note, item G on page 2 is rather ubiquitous about your responsibilities relative to patient safety and quality. I found that boards sometimes struggle with, and maybe you all don't, maybe you're experts in this, but it is an area of some consternation about what are your responsibilities relative to this body serving as a peer review committee. And I think that's always a good reminder of what are the lanes that you need to stay in when you're doing peer review and what your responsibilities and roles are.
Because usually if it comes up,
It's a big deal.
if it comes up, it's a big deal. If you don't think about it, you don't do, yeah, that's excellent.
Some time ago, we did do a suggestion that Robert brought up at the beginning of board meeting. There was a department that made a presentation to the board. It was, tight, and each month we had a new presentation. So I mean, and that was helpful. So
We're gonna do that.
Okay.
That would be part of kind of ongoing
Right.
education is what's going on.
Yeah. One of the things that really helped me in the beginning being here is that we used to have access to the internal portal off of the different system. I can't remember the name of the system now. I've slept since then. And that really helped me, like, just to kind of get to know the different departments, also to hear.
Through Board
their-
Effect or?
Board Effect.
Board
Which
Effect.
was
Board
it?
Effect?
Board Effect,
Okay.
yeah. And to also to read the stories of the different departments internally and those types of things to make a different type of connection, not only from the high level, but also to see how the employees are responding, those different stories. Those are different types of engagement that were really helpful. I don't see a lot of that on the external website. We do get some really great stories. Social media has been really fantastic and moving forward, but I felt there was a
Is that
different
same
connection.
detail in with, what
No,
are we on?
It's not in NASDAQ.
NASDAQ
NAS Advantage or something, no.
or Board Advantage? or
Board Advantage.
What are we on?
Well,
Whatever it
The
is.
new portal.
That new portal.
We'll not only work on that, but one of the things that we're going to do when y'all go in closed, if you don't have a problem, I think it might be wise to have Dinah Berdeur from the communication standpoint listen in on that, because a lot of what y'all are going to do is how it's communicated back out to y'all and what you all are doing and how we do that. And I think that would be advantageous unless we're discussing something that is sensitive, and we can talk about that, so you're okay. But I think communication ought to play a greater role in figuring out how you get this. For example, what we don't realize sometimes is some of y'all have multiple emails. You have an email for your office, you have an email personal, you have an email that we set up, and sometimes we'll have email addresses and we'll send it to y'all. But that, in Steve Montgomery's case last time, that was an email that is defunct, but it was still on our file. So we have to figure out the best way to communicate with y'all.
Grounds for impeachment.
Montgomery was defunct.
So we have a pretty good basis in this LD 1000 document, and if we can look at that, perhaps we can, cross off the things that we think are pertinent, or highlight the things that are pertinent and maybe cross off the things that aren't. Ron's also put up some orientation suggestions, which pretty closely resemble
Yeah,
these
they do.
these dotted lines here.
Yeah, those 5 areas are the 5 areas in the bylaws, and as far as what goes underneath those 5, that's completely up to your discretion, but as he said, it's kind of highlighted in LD 1000 as well.
And then maybe what we can do is put this stuff together, what an orientation program looks like, maybe if it's a day or a half day, and then say, okay, here it is, and then bring that back in February to our regularly scheduled governance meeting, and get any input and questions and changes there, and then move forward with that. Does that make everybody happy? Yeah. So obviously, the organization's mission, values, and goals are going to be something that needs to be covered. Safety and quality goals, I don't know if that's something that we need on our level. Certainly, we need the destination metrics and how we're graded and how those things work. Safety and quality will kind of be taken care of, I think, in quality committee. And those are issues that are far more important to the administrative side, I think, than it is to the board side. So I'm not sure that one necessarily needs to be included. The organization structure and decision-making process, I think that that one really is probably speaking more or less to the organizational chart, to the district as possible, and the board's interaction with that, knowing that the board is responsible. We have one solid line to the CEO, and then a solid line to legal, and then dotted lines to compliance. So understanding that, I think, is imperative for board members, to know where you can go and probably where you shouldn't, and that the CEO needs to handle some of that. So I think that that's probably what that would be. Budget and financial statements are huge, and that might be something better off with a one-on-one or a two-on-one meeting with Sharon or somebody from her team, because that's a pretty big one.
Maybe you could have some breakout sessions. You'd have general overview and have different ones come and they get that piece of it. And then for financial, that might be something that you could have a breakout session that you could schedule with Sharon to get more in depth. But you're overall just going to review, these are your financial stuff that you're going to get every month. And that would be something that
Right.
we could schedule out. Yeah.
The excellent leadership we had for that.
Population served by the organization, I think that we all have a pretty good idea. We can touch on that. We need to know that. Certainly, we need to know the payer mix, and that's probably the best way to figure that out. I'm sorry, Dorothy.
Most of this will be kind of, when I have orientation at other boards, I get this book. And a part of that is folks come in and they just cover some of the stuff. And so one of the things would have a board book that would have
Yes.
most of this stuff in it. And then the folks would come up and they could cover that. You as a board member could decide, okay, on this one, I want to get a little bit more, and I can schedule that out. But kind of having it all put together, and as folks come up, you can follow it.
And my hope would be that these standard operating procedures kind of become the book that you say.
Okay.
That will follow each of those things as they go in order.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one thing, and some of y'all have been on this board for so long you've forgotten it, but I know Zim and Amanda remember. I meet with each one of you when you come on, and you've gotten a book from the General Counsel's office that includes code of conduct, code of ethics, got information related to open meetings, open records, conflicts of interest issues, and so some of the things that are on the chart that deal with my office, you also are required to go through an orientation online with the AG and required to issue a certificate, and those are maintained in my office for each one of you, so.
My hope is, Mr. Bose, as we get that, and this standard operating procedures kind of becomes the guide plan for the board, that this document is evaluated yearly. It includes the business ethics, it includes the code of conduct, and this is something that we review maybe January or February of every year, in addition to the board evaluation, which is, in a policy, but I've never done it since I've been here, and so that's something that we need to track. And
Absolutely. could add the orientation
to the standard operating procedures.
And that would be easy to do.
Easy.
So, yeah.
Go ahead, DT. Will you hit your mic button for me? Thanks.
She didn't hit hers.
No, I just want to make sure I can hear you.
I think the one that was most helpful for me was when I became board member. I sat down with the chairman for each, like, I was in finance, so at the time, I know Trent sat down with me and briefed me on what's current, what's hot topics and all that stuff, so that, you know, day one, when I jumped in, I can be a participating member. Otherwise, you just get lost in the crowd and you have no idea what's going on. I
Sure.
think those may be very, very helpful as
No,
you know
I
what the
think,
agenda on there.
no, I think those are hugely helpful. And I think at that particular meeting is a good place to discuss committees, interest in committees. That's, I know, my first meeting with Reverend Emerson was kind of an overview, hot topics again, and then where do you think that you could best be plugged in when it comes to committee work? Because let's face it, you know, in college when that used to ring, the professor would get the phone and answer it, and no, but that would be a good place to learn about the committee work and find out where you, because let's face it, most of our work happens in the committee, so I do appreciate that suggestion.
Can we add, if the phone rings, that person has to donate to the foundation?
Yeah, an immediate donation. Yes, sir.
I kind of want to back up a little bit. I don't want us to overthink this.
Sure.
As a requirement. For those of us on the board, we're all different. We've got different backgrounds, different experiences, and so we're going to tend to migrate to those committees and whatnot that we're interested in knowing more about. I've talked to Sharon several times, and I still don't understand finance, but as long as she says it's good, I'm going to go along with her. But this really needs to be very, very top level. And then if somebody wants to do a deeper dive, they get with that person and they do a deeper dive on that.
Sure.
So you've talked about, we all have things to do and time is precious to all of us. I think it's important that there is an orientation, but it needs to be really top level, and then anything that we want as a board member to go deeper into, we can request that. So that's just my
And don't try to do it all at
advice.
once, it takes time. I mean, I've been here for a long time.
Yeah, but you're a slow learner.
Yeah, I'm a slow
You
learner.
went to school, you've got a handicap.
So do y'all think that this is something, as we kind of box this stuff together, it needs to be a half day, a full day? Spread out? I mean,
I think you ought to be able to cover the overall top-level stuff of, here's the organization, meet the staff. Neil used to have a book that he covers, that'll be part of it. You'd bring different ones in, and we ought to be able to do that in a half a day.
Okay.
We really should.
All right.
And then any,
Self-paced or other, if they want to dive in.
I agree.
Right.
Fair
If they
enough.
want additional, they can follow
Right.
back up. Yes.
Okay. Well, that'll help as we begin to put that stuff together. The next thought is, in our standard operating procedures, even in our bylaws, it does talk about continuing education requirements. And I think that, as LD 1000 states out, that additional or ongoing continuing education and information shall be provided to the board of members. But also, as for the Board of Managers, a minimum of one continuing education program per year pertaining healthcare governing boards is encouraged. There's literally every week, there is a seminar someplace in this country regarding some topic into healthcare. And I think that we should strive as a board to attend at least one of those per year, just for our own continuing education purposes, but as well as interacting with peers, finding out how somebody else is doing it on a board level. I think that would be very, very, very beneficial. I don't think that one of these seminars or trips over, 2 or 3 days a year is asking too much, and I think that we would all be very surprised as to what we
get
would
out of
learn.
it. Yep.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
I think, I'm not sure this is the right place to talk about it, but for me, do we have enough to cover here on rules of engagement with leadership team? Because as an operator, I would feel uncomfortable if a board member would talk to one of my direct report without me knowing what the subject is about, or at least give them a feedback.
Sure.
Back so that
I
they
think
would know
that
what
that
the
would-
topic's about after they talk to.
Yeah, I
one
mean, I
staff
think
member.
that number one in starting any orientation is the overall org chart, and that can be made very clear by either legal counsel or by the chairman of the board as to how that org chart works and flows. Because you're right, we can get into a lot of trouble when there's 12 people, going outside of the communication lines and.
I just want to make sure that, we build the trust with the leadership so
Right.
that there's no off-the-record communication. We all know exactly what we're talking about so that we can build a strong relationship.
No, I think that's paramount, and doing it there at the beginning with the overall org chart is the appropriate place to cover that.
On the continuing education, are we wanting the board members to be, what's that, board
Trustee.
trustees? Trustee certification. I mean,
For discussion, I don't know
Yeah,
what all
I'm
is
just-
involved, so I know you do, very much.
Well, you really don't go through orientation, just go online and do those questions. And either you overthink it and blow it, or you just remember how we conducted ourselves at board meeting and issues. And I think it took me 30 minutes, I don't know what it was. And then you you have to do so many CEUs
right.
during the year to maintain that.
Is that through the
State.
state?
Because it was Dorothy and I know, and Trent, I think, that were certified trustees.
Yeah, it's easy to take the test. It's continuing those continuing education points, because you have to do so many every 2 years, because I just got a notice that said if I wanted to, I had to send in my continuing education points and have to get them to Robert, because he have to sign that I'm a board member. Parkland's entire board was recognized because they were all certified board trustees at one of these healthcare governing board meetings. And so those are the ones we normally go to.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that, I don't know that, again, we want to put too many onerous requirements on board members, but I think that that's certainly a goal to strive for. And as far as, internal board governance, something to track and follow to see, there's 3 of us, by 2021, could there be 6 or 9?
Right,
And then once you get that, then you can make that as part of your orientation. Hey, new board member, this is where you need to be by when doing this, and then us two can have that certification.
I volunteer the board office to do it first.
The exec committee starts.
Roger, your idea is good, though. Maybe it's a phase in. It's a goal and objectives. We met, I talked to Chuck yesterday about, in addition to this and what we're talking about here, there's probably some strategic plans, some revisions that we didn't get to that Amanda and we talked about, and so that's coming kind of right behind this. So I think that'd be a good place to look at that.
But do we all agree that that's a good goal is to?
Signed up for the one in Hawaii.
Did you? Okay. We'll all be in Maui in June. Well, that's actually a good segue in talking about travel policy. I asked Neil to put some things together for me. Other hospital districts' travel policies, public hospitals, some of them allow travel, some of them do not. It's kind of all over the place. We have Fort Worth ISD's policy, we have DISD's policy.
Dallas County.
We have Dallas counties, we have Tarrant counties. We also have our own policy, but it too needs some revisions. But certainly, I don't think that anybody here expects, when traveling to these conferences or seminars, that those are picked up on our own dime. There are certainly some expenses when you go out to dinner, maybe having alcoholic beverages, that's on your own dime, but your meal is paid for by the district. We need to clean that up and write that down. I think also too, to some extent, we need to limit it I don't think that each board member needs 9 trips across the country a year.
Really?
Just as, I mean, we are stewards of taxpayer money, so we need to make sure that that's fair and it's not publicly perceived as, you know, the board members are vacationing on the taxpayer pennies.
I
So,
only had 2.
Is seeing how recently past chair, I think in 3 years as chair, maybe go back and check the records, I didn't go anywhere. I don't mean that as a positive thing, 'cause I think I missed some opportunities. Because Dorothy, I talked about some really good seminars she went to because she had time to do it. And she brought that information back. I know, I bet you the one that drove over to that, but I mean, I don't want to say people shouldn't be doing it. I think there is a need for boards to stay up on policies and procedures and best practices. So I'm not saying, gee, I didn't go track. Certain people have other time and things like that. So I think it is good to come up with a specific policy that allows, there's always going to be an exception. If there
well,
is,
and,
then come back to
you
the
know,
executive committee or whatever.
as we begin this bond process, I'm certain that there's going to be tours of other facilities across the country and
No
whatever
question.
else. So there's going to be some exceptions to rules, but we really need to clean that up. So,
And the point I'm making is we should be the stewards of the money, whether we were pre-bond, weren't about.
Sure.
We weren't worried about that. We just didn't.
no.
It just didn't fall in, but I think you're right. I think
Do we want to do any kind of approval process, like the chairman approves travel for board members or something like that? Some sort of regulation on it?
Yeah, there's some of that involved, and I think if I read correctly, in the standard operating procedures, that the executive committee looks at that,
Oh, does it? Okay.
if I remember correctly. But yeah, that policy would need some kind of look through. And, you know, I know in my civic life, whenever you travel to a TML conference or whatever else, your receipts are then put in front of the city's ethics committee. I think in our case, those receipts could be approved by the governance committee. You know, so the travel is approved by the executive committee. The receipts and expenditures before they're paid are approved by the governance committee or by finance, whomever, whatever. And then that reimbursement check is cut and do that. So I think we can clean that up. What I would like to do, because that is kind of a whole thing, is if, with the committee's permission, I'd like to see if maybe Amanda and Dorothy, if you would work with me on, and Neil's office on a travel policy that we could present back. And then also if the committee would allow the executive committee the opportunity to work with Neil on the standard operating procedures and bring back a red line to the full committee and then a full vote by the board, so that this 2006 document can be updated 14 years later. How does that sound, gang?
I'm okay with working with Amanda and you.
Okay. I think that we can do that. I think that we can come up with a good policy. And, you know, we need to compare and contrast other policies. We need to look at Tarrant County's policy to make sure that we're not in conflict with that, and, you know, lots of stuff that goes involved with it, but.
I think this is great clarification. I don't think there's been any misuse. I'm saying, I think it's a good time, just like orientation. It's a great time to get some of these things we didn't get to. I think it's a perfect time to do that in the new year.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say just kudos to Suzanne, because she's done a great job of I know when I've traveled, how she's managed that with receipts and what's covered, what's not covered. So I've kind of just gone by her direction, you know. No, you can't go to that restaurant, but you can go to this restaurant.
Well, that's good. Does anybody have any other questions regarding the topics today? I'm really proud of you, team. This is really good.
I have one.
Yes, sir.
comment.
Don't mess it up, Rev.
This is the broken record.
Okay.
Okay, is that, as we talked about earlier about the orientation of board, is that I just think that somewhere, if we ever do a strategic workshop conference, that part of the orientation overall could be included in that strategic plan.
Okay.
When we.
A presentation of the finalized document? Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Right, right, no, what I'm saying is, I'm kind of throwing this at Chuck, because Charlie would never pay me any attention.
Well, in all fairness, Reverend, Chuck and I've already had that meeting, you're fixing to get us a TT. It's coming.
Yeah. Once we meet and talk about where we see JPS is headed.
Right.
That an orientation, maybe that could be the first step in, we get in to meet all of the department heads, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. I got you. I understand.
You'd be happy to know we had a meeting yesterday, Dorothy's in attendance, and I think I told Chuck, I said, you know, again, we can talk about, we spent a lot of time the last few years focused on the bond package, but at the end of the day, Ralph, I totally agree with you. Even in that bond package, and I think you even used the example of the clinics and the CVS's, healthcare is changing so much. With Robert and staff, I think it is time. In fact, I actually brought the matrix to a luncheon yesterday and said, this needs updating, and I think we're headed in that direction, Ralph, so.
You know how when you are the outgoing person, you always have a list for the incoming folks.
I presented that list yesterday.
14 pages.
And I'm happy to say with Amanda and Zim, I did listen, because they're new members. Ralph, it wasn't that I wasn't listening as somebody who's been on this board longer than I have. And I will tell you that, yeah, we need to get through both those things. To tell you, we weren't focused a lot with Blue Ribbon committees and with Robert and the staff, and they did a fantastic job. That's past us now. What we've got ahead of us is some positive decisions on where we take this institution of healthcare, not just throughout Tarrant County and state. So anyway, I'm excited about doing all that. And thank you, Roger, for stepping up and going and getting this on this agenda and having a special one.
Ron?
Just one final, I mentioned at the beginning, but is the board fine with picking a meeting once a year to do to meet the compliance requirement in terms of having an agenda item at one of the board meetings?
I think that that's necessary. It would also be a good time for us at that same meeting to put the standard operating procedures and have everybody sign it when they're in the room and not ask for them to return it.
Don't leave the room.
Because we, as a board, are not very good at following instructions, so. Yes.
Quick suggestion. I know we're not paying for alcohol or anything when we travel. Can we make it a policy that no more than one drink, because we represent the hospital system when we travel?
I think that we could put
Depends on
some.
what the drink is.
Yeah. I think that we could and should probably put something about responsibility if that's taken.
Because none of my staff drink more than one drink when they travel.
Right. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well,
In public.
I think we could put something that, yeah.
That's good. Good idea.
Well, I think you ought to be careful, though, in how you define that. The specifics of one drink
Well, and that's
may
why-
be going too far.
Yeah.
That's what the Rev was going to say, because he serves communion all the time. You know, so.
No, I think that there should be something about
think-
responsibility.
Yes, I think there is a code of conduct, if
Sure,
you will,
right.
when you're on travel, but you get down to one drink, and that may or may not work for everybody, so.
Robert needed 2 of those just to get on an airplane.
Yeah, you're kind
Well,
of said
yeah, listen, I appreciate you all coming here today. I know that we have quality coming up at noon and planning at 3:30. I want to thank the staff, as always, for coming in here and listening to all of us. We do appreciate your time, for sure. I want to introduce D'Angela Wright, who is the new Executive Assistant for Compliance. And she was a little bit nervous coming in today, but we're not so bad. We're not so bad. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and you have something else?
Roger, I just want to mention something. I'm going to leave an article I just showed. Unfortunately, I can't make quality. I've got to go board some people, because I've got to speak at a lunch, and I'll be back for planning. But there was a great article about this hospital district and what it did in the Dallas Morning News. And I'm going to leave it for you, Chuck, for quality. Talking about our family violence, what we did here. It's really a very positive article. Make the front page about how great JPS is doing things in Dallas. Yes. But obviously, it's a serious issue also, and I thought it was great that the Dallas Morning News recognized JPS for the work we've done. So anyway, I'll leave it for you, Chuck, for
Yeah,
quality.
see, that's the type of thing we don't know enough about. in my opinion. I mean, it's like Ralph is always saying, how you get stuff out for the community to see. Dorothy
Mr.
has
Chairman,
mentioned.
one second.
Yep.
We're adjourned at 11:05.
Dorothy
Since
has
it's not an agenda topic, I'm not going to